Recorded.
Hi, welcome to session 3, where we will be discussing comprehensive incident analysis. My name is John Kildea, and I am a medical physicist at the McGill University Health Centre in Montreal, Quebec. Here's an overview of what we will cover in this session. We will start off with a look at the anatomy of an incident, what incidents are. We will have a look at the motivation for why we do incident investigations. Then we will look at some preliminaries, definitions, and concepts for incident investigations. And ultimately, we will finish up with how to conduct a comprehensive investigation. Okay, quickly, to get started, let's have a little look back on session 2. Session 2, we introduced investigations. We looked at the difference between concise and comprehensive. We did multi-incident analysis. We talked about starting rules and stopping rules, and we looked at some concise investigation examples. Okay, let's have a look quickly at the anatomy of an incident, as this will help us later on in today's presentation. Okay, so something unsafe was detected. If the something reached the patient, then it was an incident. So in this case, we're asking what was the thing that did happen to the patient. If that something did not reach the patient, then it is a near miss. And our question is, what was the thing that could have happened to the patient? And really the thing that we're interested in is called the primary problem type in the ENSER-RT minimum data set. So the first thing is the thing that happened or could have happened. This is the primary problem type. And then we ask, what was it that caused or influenced the unsafe thing that either happened as an incident or could have happened as a near miss? And this is called the contributing factor in the ENSER-RT system. Finally, we will ask, what was the result to the patient of the thing that happened? And this is the immediate impact of the incident. Okay, so a little reminder very quickly of the motivation for why we do incident investigations in the first place. Indeed, why we do incident learning and incident analysis. And this is something I just grabbed from the internet. I did a search for Esther Dyson, and there's a quote attributed to Esther Dyson: "It's always make new mistakes." So we don't want to repeat mistakes that we've made. They've happened, but we should be learning from them, and we shouldn't repeat them. This is really the goal and the motivation for incident reporting, incident investigation, and altogether incident learning. And it recognizes that mistakes happen, mistakes will continue to happen, but we learn from the mistakes that have already been made, and we shouldn't repeat them. Okay, so now let's move forward with the topic of today's presentation, which is comprehensive incident analysis. So first of all, let's have a look at some preliminaries, in other words, definitions and concepts. Okay, incident management. The point to get across here is that investigation is just one part of the whole incident management process. There is what happens before the incident, ideally to have the safest conditions possible. There is the immediate response in dealing with the incident when it occurs. Then there is the whole analysis process, which involves preparing for the analysis itself, the follow through after the analysis, and closing the loop. And today we're interested in investigation, so we're going to look at the analysis process. Okay, what are the goals of an investigation? Well, before we do the investigation, it's important that we have the goals figured out. What we're interested in is to determine what happened, which is the primary problem type, how and why it happened, which are the contributing factors, and what can be done to reduce the likelihood of recurrence and make care safer. And these are the recommendations that come out of the incident investigation. So these are the goals of the investigation. These are what we want to get at the end of the investigation process. What types of investigation can be conducted? Well, we can have comprehensive versus concise, and concise was discussed in week 2, and comprehensive will be done less often than concise, simply because it requires a lot more work and it is not needed as often. Most events do not require a comprehensive investigation. And as Lyndon outlined in session 2, here are the differences between comprehensive and concise. Comprehensive is multidisciplinary. It involves a full chronology, a formal analysis, formal recommendations, and it can take anywhere from hours to weeks to conduct. Whereas a concise investigation happens very fast. It's unidisciplinary, involves only a partial chronology, an informal analysis, and there may be recommendations or there may be not. And it only takes minutes to hours to conduct. So as you can see, concise investigations are conducted more often than comprehensive, simply due to the amount of work involved. Okay, if we are to conduct a comprehensive investigation, where will we go for guidelines? Well, we may use the CPSI, Comprehensive Investigation Incident Investigation Framework, and the CPSI is the Canadian Patient Safety Institute. Or we may use the London Protocol. Either of these can be found easily online through a Google search. Okay, do we want to do the investigation? We may, as we said, it takes a lot of time to do a comprehensive investigation. So do we stand back and wait for the situation to occur where we may want to do it? Well, yes, we could, but in order to really get the experience, it is worth conducting a comprehensive investigation as a trial run to demonstrate what is required and to show staff what it looks like when an investigation is being conducted. So my recommendation here is that every centre should have conducted a comprehensive investigation just for the sake of it, to get the experience, make it easier when a real situation occurs to be able to do it, and also to show staff what a comprehensive investigation looks like, so that when the real incident occurs, the staff don't feel threatened or concerned, and they know what to expect in the investigation process. Okay, just a note on the role of patients and family in investigations. So the Canadian Patient Safety Institute are strongly in favour of including the patient and family, and this is not a surprise given that it is the Canadian Patient Safety Institute and it involves patients. So they recommend that patients be included in comprehensive incident investigations. And so their framework includes a section on patient-family perspective. And it also refers to the Canadian disclosure guidelines that was similarly drawn up by the CPSI. And these are available online at patientsafetyinstitute.ca, along with the incident investigation framework guidelines. Okay, so a little about the fundamental principles of an investigation. And these need to be in place before the investigation in order to ensure an effective investigation. So we need to have a safe and just culture. We need to have consistency and fairness. We need a team approach, and there needs to be confidentiality. And I'll just go through each of these very briefly. So a safe and just culture, this comprises openness, honesty, fairness, and accountability. And having these in place promotes understanding, learning, and improvement. So staff are clear that the goal of an investigation is to improve things, to improve understanding for everyone's benefit, and it's not a blame game. There needs to be consistency and fairness. It needs to be clear to staff in advance what will happen after the incident is reported. So when staff are reporting an incident, they need to know what is going to happen with what they're reporting and what an incident investigation looks like. So this again goes back to what we were saying about the value of conducting an incident investigation even before a real incident that requires it comes up. We should have a team approach. And as mentioned earlier, patients should be involved, and key people involved with the incident should be included. This is a little different than the London protocol, as we will see, which doesn't talk about including the key people with the incident, involved in the incident. And naturally, there should be confidentiality, and this encourages open participation in the process. Okay. The CPSI talk about systems thinking, and this is an important concept in incident investigation. And this recognizes that human error is a symptom of a poorly designed system. So it has several components, 3 of which I'm outlining here. We have the Swiss cheese model, we've got human factors and context. I'll just go through each of these to explain them. So the Swiss cheese model was developed by James Reason in the UK, and it basically tells us that most of the contributing factors to an incident can be attributed to the safety culture and to associated behaviors of the organization. This is very important. And it's basically telling us that we shouldn't blame the last piece of cheese. So we can think of a system as containing multiple layers of Swiss cheese, and in some situations, all the holes of the Swiss cheese can line up, and an incident can get through. Well, what we need to bear in mind is that it's not the last slice or the first slice. It is the whole system that is at fault. So we shouldn't be blaming the people who are involved in the front end of the incident, but rather looking at the whole system to see what can be improved to prevent future incidents. And this is shown in the London protocol with this diagram that shows us how various parts of the whole system come together to ultimately, or can come together to ultimately give rise to an incident at the end of the process. System thinking involves human factors. And human factors is a study of how humans interact with the world around them. Historically, incident investigation looked at the most obvious cause of the error, which is most likely a human, and essentially is the last slice of Swiss cheese. But the modern approach is to accept that human error is a symptom of a poorly designed system. And so it's really the whole system that is fault. And this is the core of the CPSI comprehensive and even concise framework, and also the London protocol. Okay, so we need to think a little bit about the context as well. And the context is the full larger system. And in thinking about the context, there's a few questions we can ask. We can ask, is this type of incident happening often within our organization? To determine this, we can check incident reports. We can look at patient complaints. Beyond our own organization, we may want to determine, is this type of incident happening elsewhere? And for that, we can check the NSER-RT database, for example. Or we could go further and we could check the Safran database at the IAEA. And we may ask also, what is the practice in the community? Is our organization doing something different to other organizations? Or are we operating the same as elsewhere in the community? And what are our departmental priorities? How does this fit in with how does the incident that we're looking at fit in with our priorities? What is the regulatory context? And what is the financial context, the human resources context? Do we have enough staff in the area where the incident occurred? And what are the demands of the public? What do the public expect? So this is how we look at the larger system, the things that we must take into play when we consider the context of the whole incident. Okay, so before we move on to looking at the comprehensive investigation, let's have a look at the features of an effective investigation. At its most basic level, an investigation should be timely. It should happen as soon as possible after the incident is detected. It should be interdisciplinary, and as already mentioned, it should include patient and family members. They need to know that the incident is being conducted. They may not want to be directly involved, but we should offer to involve them and involve them as much as possible. It should be objective and impartial. And for credibility, it should include, again, patients and senior management, not just a quiet investigation by ourselves. It should examine the literature. So we should get that larger context as we were just talking about. And it should evaluate the impact of any implementation, of the recommendations that are made. So if we make recommendations based on the incident investigation, we should have a look at what this will result in, and changes that we may recommend may have knock-on effects elsewhere that we should consider. And an investigation should avoid cognitive traps and biases. So it should include people who don't know about the incident as well as those who do, because the people who don't know about it are not already biased to think in some way about it. They can think clearly about it, and it should avoid discussing what should have been done, because the goal, we know what should have been done. The goal is not to talk about what should have been done, but the goal is to talk about what actually happened, why it happened, and what can we do to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Everybody knows what should have been done, and there is a temptation to talk about what should have been done, but really the goal of the investigation is to figure out what happened and try to avoid that same thing from happening again in the future. Okay, so what is an investigation and what is it not? Just to quickly reinforce this point, an investigation is a system improvement review. So it's a process to help us to improve our system. I'm making a note of the word system again. And it is not an individual performance or accountability review. Individual performance and accountability reviews may be required, but these are separate to the incident investigation. These are a different thing completely. So an incident investigation is not that. Okay. How do we go about conducting the incident investigation? So this is the meat of today's presentation. Okay, so we need to put in place the preliminaries. And the preliminaries will include documentation of known facts. And in our case, the documentation of known facts generally is the incident report. And I'm showing here what we use at the McGill University Health Centre. It's the SAILS incident reporting software that was initially developed at the Ottawa Hospital Cancer Centre and then redeveloped here at McGill. This allows us to report the facts of the incident at the time the incident occurs. So here we're showing what an example incident looks like. Incident report. It's the documentation of the known facts. It is generally quite short. And here we see that, I'll just read it out. During the preparation of a replan, due to volume changes, the incorrect secondary data sets were assigned to the plan and fused with the correct primary data set. Contouring was completed on these data sets. Upon subsequent review, the error was discovered and corrected. So as we can see, there's some information here, but probably not all the information that we need to conduct a thorough investigation. Okay, but we have the documentation of known facts as they stand. We need a high-level timeline. We really need to know how this incident came to being. And so we need a chronology of events. And this is an example chronology of events for the incident that we just saw in the incident report. So it details what happened when, with exact dates and with exact details of what went on. Okay, we need a patient identifier, we need dates, times, etc. And these we will get from the electronic medical record or elsewhere, any other documentation that we might have. And we need to have a preliminary analysis. And the preliminary analysis will likely be done by the coordinators or other team members when the incident was first detected. And ideally, the people doing the preliminary analysis will have some training and some knowledge of human factors principles, so that right at the outset, they can help identify failures in the larger system that we may want to address. Okay, and I'm just showing here in the incident reporting tool that we use at the McGill University Health Centre, we do have at the top the incident description as provided by the incident reporter. But before the incident is actually reported, we require the coordinators, and these are the therapists who really kind of float around between the machines and make sure that everything is coordinated. The coordinators will provide additional comments regarding the incident before it is submitted, and they can provide the initial preliminary investigation. Okay, so we have the preliminary analysis, and now we need to decide on the analysis framework, whether it is concise or comprehensive. And we need to form an investigation team, really in the case where it's comprehensive, where we would need to have a facilitator, somebody who has incident analysis experience. We have a leader, someone who has operational responsibility and the power to, the authority to ask people to participate and the authority to change practice if needed. And then we need a number of team members, each with defined roles. And we need open lines of communication with the patient or family. Okay, just to highlight that a comprehensive investigation, because of the work involved and because of what is required, it is usually reserved for incidents involving permanent harm or death or significant risk thereof. So these are for very serious incidents. And as mentioned already, the options available to us include the CPSI comprehensive framework or the London Protocol, and of course there are others out there that your centre may use or consider using. But regardless of the protocol that we're using, we have some basic goals, and these are to determine what happened, how and why it happened, and how to prevent recurrence. Okay, and if we think back on the anatomy of an incident that we saw earlier, we know that what happened is the primary problem type. We know that how and why it happened are the contributing factors, and how to prevent recurrence. These are the recommendations that come out of the analysis. Okay, so the primary problem type, what happened? This is fact finding. We're not talking about what should have happened, we're talking about what did happen. And the fact finding is a very important step, and it's useful to have a checklist on hand for this, and the CPSI provide an example in their framework. So first off, we would review the incident report, as this contains the first formal summary of information about the event. But as we saw already, the incident report probably does not contain a lot of information. And just to highlight that, I'm showing here incidents that are reported at the McGill University Health Centre, which I imagine are somewhat representative of what happens in most centres. You can see these real incidents are shown in blue, and if you look at the number of words in the incidents, the vast majority of incidents have less than 50 words contained within them. And if you look here, we had developed initially within the CPQR some example incidents And these were written by experts sitting down, thinking about incidents without being on the forefront of reporting an incident when it occurred. And you can see that in the ideal situation, our incidents contain a lot more words than they do in reality. So in reality, our incident reports are not very detailed. So we need more information than what is contained within the initial report. Okay, so we may want to review other sources of information, such as the electronic medical record data, and we may want to interview people who were involved in the incident. And particularly if it was a major incident that requires a comprehensive investigation, the interview is a very important part of the process. And we, the team who are doing the investigation, should visit the location of the incident. We should look at photos of the incident, and we should really try to see what was going on at the time of the incident. So the more information we can have, the better. With all the information that we can gather, we should create a detailed timeline, and there's various ways to do this, various formats that we might use, and we saw one of them earlier. And in this timeline, we should include details about the post-incident patient management, and we should include factual events that actually occurred. And I'm just reinforcing the point that we should not be talking about what should have been done. We know what should have been done. We really need to know what actually happened. We're talking about the primary problem type. And we should review supporting info. And these are peripheral information that we need to have a look at, providing information about the context. So we should review existing policies and procedures within our organization. We should scan practices at other organizations to see if we're different or following the same guidelines as elsewhere. And we should look for previous similar incidents, either internally in our own incident reporting database or externally, for example, in the NSERC-RT database. And finally, we should feel free to consult with colleagues elsewhere or internally and with experts in the field. Okay, so that was the primary problem type. The next part is we need to determine how and why the incident happened. And going back to our anatomy of an incident, these are the contributing factors. So we need to identify the contributing factors and the relationships between the contributing factors and the relationships between the contributing factors and the primary problem type. We'll see how this all comes together in a moment, but we will use guiding questions. And again, we will focus on systems level stuff. We will focus on the meso and macro levels rather than on the micro level. The temptation always is to focus on the micro level or to focus on that last slice of Swiss cheese, but really we need to look at all the slices together. And we should be asking questions like, what was this influenced by? And what else might have affected this? So continually as we're going on, we should be asking these questions so that we get as much into the depth of what went on as possible. And as mentioned already, we should be using systems theory and human factors. So we should be focusing not on the human level stuff, but on the interaction between the human and the system. We need to look at the equipment, the task that was involved, the work environment that was involved, etc. And we should use things like cognitive walkthrough, heuristic evaluation, and usability testing. So we should really go through what happened in detail and try to understand it as best as possible. And we should use diagramming, and we'll look at some of these diagrams right now. We have the fishbone diagram, the tree diagram, and the constellation diagram. So the tree diagram looks like this, where we can see how all the contributing factors come together to ultimately cause the critical incident that occurred. And we have the tree diagram, which shows how the root cause, here on the bottom right, can give rise to all these contributing factors that ultimately give rise to the incident that caused the harm to the patient. Or if it was a near miss, could have caused the harm to the patient. And there may be multiple root causes, multiple contributing factors. The CPSI recommend using what they call a constellation diagram. And for the constellation diagram, they start off with the incident and the incident outcome at the very center. And around it, they list all the contributing factor categories. So for example, the task, the equipment that was involved, the work environment, the patient, the team, the organization as a whole, etc. And then they, the thing at the center is the primary thing that happened, is the primary problem type. And around it, we have the contributing factors. And then the contributing factor categories, excuse me. And then for the contributing factor categories, we list, or we state the actual contributing factors for each category. And then we link the contributing factors together, because one factor may give rise to another factor, and they're all interrelated. And we want to visualize these relationships. And ultimately, having worked our way out, and we know what contributing factors give rise to what, we make our findings. We can say that this is what gave rise or ultimately helped to contribute to the incident that occurred. So we have the findings of our investigation. Okay, once we have determined the findings of the investigation, so we've determined what ultimately gave rise to the incident that occurred, the contributing factors, we need to make a statement of findings. And this statement of findings essentially describes the contributing factors and the relationships with the outcome, or in other words, the relationship between the contributing factors and the primary problem type. And to do this, as we just saw, we're working from the outside of the constellation diagram back into the center, where we have the incident that was that occurred or was detected. And we want to state how the contributing factors in the context of the incident increased or decreased the likelihood of this outcome occurring. And this is where we will ultimately be making our recommendations, how we can change this situation so that we can reduce for the future the likelihood of the same outcome occurring again. Okay, the London Protocol is similar to the CPSI Comprehensive, although a little different. So quick overview, it talks about the identification and the decision to investigate. So again, it is reserved for significant incidents. You select the people who are going to be involved in the investigation team. You do fact finding and data gathering. You determine the incident chronology. You determine essentially the primary problem types, or as the London Protocol called them, the care delivery problems. And then we identify the contributory factors and ultimately end up making recommendations and developing an action plan. So pretty much the same process as the CPSI Comprehensive. Okay, but there are a few differences between both. The London Protocol has little or no emphasis on the involvement of patients and family. Thinking has changed a little bit since the London Protocol came out, and there's more of a recognition of the role of patients and family members in the incident investigation, or at least the line of communication with the patients and family members. The London Protocol also suggests not involving staff involved with the incident in the investigation. It's a little different from the CPSI also. And it talks about care delivery problems, multiple care delivery problems, as opposed to a single primary problem type in the CPSI. And in the case of the London Protocol, there can be multiple contributing factors attached to each care delivery problem. But at the end of the day, each protocol facilitates a brainstorming exercise and ultimately should arrive at the same conclusions. Each protocol has its strengths and weaknesses, and it's up to the individual organization which one to use. I think the key point is that each organization should be familiar or should have gone through the process of conducting their preferred protocol. And as we mentioned already, this helps ensure that when a real incident does occur, that the team is ready and knows what to do, and also that staff are ready and know what to expect. And that's it. That really summarizes how to do the CPSI and London Protocol investigations. Thank you very much.
This conference will now be recorded.